Hello and welcome to another Snap Reports class. I have a very interesting challenge for you today for us to solve together here. We have a number of files that we receive from different locations. They are meant to send us the same type of information, but the information does not come in the same structure. So for example, these three files, they give us information about schools and student enrollment for different areas, different sets of schools. But maybe people who are creating these reports, they use different softwares, so they get a different report from area to area. For each one of the reports, we are interested in extracting three of those columns. So for example, this file, I want the column with header school, enrollment date, and enrollment. The type of information is the same that I have here in the second file under school name, date, and enrollment. But you see that some of the column headers are not the same. Some are the same, others are not. And finally, the third file comes with an extra column here that the other ones do not have. School ID, we do not want that column for our data importation. We are interested in column institution, date, and number of pupils. So three columns, also three files, and we want to combine three columns from each file in one table of data only. And if it was something that we were doing one time only, well, we could just copy and paste and everything was good. We would move on with our lives. We didn't have to spend much time thinking about it. But if this is a process that happens regularly, every day, every week, every month, it doesn't matter. Every now and then we receive these three reports and we want to combine the information, then it might be worth the time to automate it, meaning making the task easier to repeat with the minimum effort and the best results. So the goal is, I want to put the files in a folder and click a button somewhere else that brings me the information without me worrying about column names, renaming columns manually, or anything like that. Okay, so let's do that. My name is Celia Alves. In case you don't know me, in my channel I teach how to automate procedures in Excel. In this case, we are going to use PowerQuery in Excel. If you never used PowerQuery, be prepared to be amazed. If you use PowerQuery, then you know that magic is about to happen. Even if you do not have a similar project on hand to solve a similar problem, take the time to understand the steps and be aware of what is possible to do. One of these days you will come across with something similar and you will be able to apply what you've learned here. You will be ready. Awareness is one of the most important things to become a good Excel developer, Excel professional. Being aware of what is possible of doing with Excel is the first step to then know that the next step is just about finding the information you need to build a solution to solve a problem. So let's get you one more skill in your tool belt so that you can start automate your procedures in Excel. Go home early. Do not spend your time with copying and pasting. If you are a fine accountant but you are spending your time with copying and pasting in Excel, then that's not good. Let's solve that, okay? Let's start the exercise. If you want to follow along with the files, you will be able to find them in my Telegram channel. The link will be in the video description. Okay, so let's start. Okay, so like I mentioned, I have a folder, this folder School Reports, where I place these three files that I receive every now and then. In this case, it appears that these files are coming every quarter. Okay. And I just want to put them there and then extract the information I need very quickly without effort. We will need effort, but that effort is needed one time only when we are building the solution. The next time we'll be good to go, press one button or so, and that's it. Okay, so this is our folder. Outside this folder, I have an Excel file, all schools data, that I already started and where I created an Excel table mapping the column renaming, meaning I placed in the left column all the column names in the different files that I want to be changed, renamed, and the new column header I want for each one of those. So it's saying here school name that we can find here in the middle file, this file in the middle, I want this column header to become school. Date, that I can also find in this file, and on the other one on the right, I want it to become enrollment date. If I find the column enrollment in any of the files, I want it to be renamed as student count, institution to be renamed as school, number of pupils to be renamed as student count. And we do not need to worry about any of the other columns that we are not interested in importing, just the ones we want to combine the 3 columns from the 3 files together into one final table. Okay, so I have this table here. We can see here at the top that if we go to table design, we have renames as name of the table under the table name box. Okay, let me close all the other files and then we will work from here. Okay, so here we are in our Excel file. We want to connect to that folder and combine all the files. If you have some experience with Power Query, you might know that when you connect to a folder to import all the files in that folder, Power Query is expecting that all the files have the same structure, so that it can apply the same transformation to all of them before combining the result of that transformation to each one of the files into one final column or final table. Okay, but we will handle that problem. We will start by connecting to the folder anyways. So let's come to Data, Get Data, from File, from Folder. There we go. Then what you have to do is to navigate to the folder where you have the files. Here I am in folder School Reports. Let's click Open. Okay, so here we could choose Transform Data or Combine and Transform. In this case, I'm not going to worry about any of the settings here, the list of files that we have in the folder. We can discuss that in another opportunity. So instead of Transform Data, I'm going to do Combine and Transform. Power Query brings us to this window. Since we are connecting to a folder, it's telling us, okay, I see this is a folder containing CSV files. Explain me what to do with one of these files, and then I will make sure to apply the same steps to all the files in the folder. Okay, by default, it offers us the first file as sample file for us to use to explain those steps. Since the files are not the same, and this one only has 3 columns and other files have more than 3 columns, I'm going to choose one of the other files. The second file, let's see, it has more than 3 columns. Let's use this one as a sample. Okay, so let's do OK. And what we will do now is that we will explain the transformation we need to do to all the files using that one that we just selected as sample. When we do this, Power Query creates a number of helper queries here on the left that we can see here on the left. The transform sample file is the query where the transformations to be applied to all the files will be explained. At the moment, Power Query simply defined the headers in this step, promoted headers, where from the step source, the first row contained in each file is being promoted as header. Okay, and then Power Query is simply combining all the files in the folder just by using the column headers in each file. And so if we go to this query here, School Reports, we see the combination of those 3 files. In the first column, source.name, we can see that we have rows from each one of the 3 files here. But for example, institution only shows values for the school North Hand. All the other rows show null because none of the other files has this column header. We would find the school names in other columns, for example, school or school name, but what happens is that those columns did not even came into the final table because Power Query is just looking for the column names that we have in the file that we are using as a sample file. So here I have institution, I don't have school or school name. So it's not even recognizing those columns in the other files when combining the information. So how can we do that? Well, Everything that we do here in the transform sample file query will be applied to all the files. So I can tell Power Query, I need you to go through all the column names and rename some of those according to my instructions. For this process, we will use two M functions. Let me show you those functions. One of the functions that we will use, M functions, is Table.RenameColumns. This, like the name says, is a function that allows us to rename columns in a table, but it is not available in any of the Power Query buttons in the Power Query editor. So this is when you start realizing that maybe it's a good idea to start learning a little bit of M code here and there. I will not tell you that you should go and read all the functions, the M functions, and learn them all. I think a good mindset is to be prepared to find new functions and apply them according to the problems we have to solve. Okay, exactly as we do with the Excel functions. We do not know all the 500 Excel functions, right? We know a few for the common problems we need to solve, and every now and then we learn a new one because there's something different that we need to solve. Okay, I spoke about this function in more detail in the previous video. I will leave the link for that video if you are interested. But what this function does is it takes a table and then a list that is being represented here as renames with the columns that we want to rename and the corresponding new name for each one, and then renames those columns. And there's an optional parameter here, missing field, that we did not use in that previous video that I mentioned, but we will be using this parameter here. It will be crucial to solve our problem. Okay, you can come here and check the examples. What you see is that we need to provide a table. We will provide simply the table name, and we need to then indicate a list that starts here and ends here. And within that list, we need pairs of lists with two items. Each list has the old and the new name, old and new name, for all the columns that we want to be renamed. Okay, to create this list of lists, this list of lists composed by two items, we will use this function List.Zip that I also explained in that previous video that I advise you to watch if you are interested. This is the function that will allow us to create that list of pairs of column names. Those pairs of names are in that table that I showed you in the Excel file. I will need to load that table into the Power Query editor. So for now, let's leave our query as is, and we just go close and load to. I do not want to load that table just yet. My default settings are to load my queries as connection only. That's what I'll do. Just click OK. That's it. And now we are going to load this table to Power Query. So just click anywhere in the table, data from table/range, and that's it. We have a query named renames, which is the name of the table. The change type step is applying text to both columns, which is correct. And now we could either continue from here in this query, or I will create a new query referencing this one. So right click, reference. I'm going to name this query as renames list. And in here, I want to transform this table in a list that is composed of pairs of names. So school name will go with school, date will go with enrollment date, enrollment will go with student count, and so on and so on. So to do that, we come here, we create a new step. And in this step, we are referring to the previous step, source, okay, and we are going to apply List.Zip to that step. If you are used to Power Query, you may think, well, source is not a list, so why would I apply List.Zip, which is a list function, to a table? Source is a table, right? But you see here, when we hover our mouse on top of List.Zip, we see that is requiring lists as lists. So we need a list of lists. Okay. So if we need a list, we can type in curly brackets. Okay. So beginning and end. This will define a list, and then the lists that we want to zip together in pairs are the lists that are composed of the from items in the left column and the other list, the items in the right column of this table. So table source column from will be one of the lists, comma, and table source column 2 will be the other list of items, and they are two lists of the same size. When we apply the function List.Zip to those two lists, the result will be a list of pairs of names. Let's see what happens. I forgot one parenthesis here at the end to close that parenthesis for the List.Zip function. Okay, enter. You see, now we get a list. We can even see the icon here is different from the other ones that represent tables. This represents a list. And if we click in any of these cells, we will see that at the bottom we have a pair of names indicating the old name and the new name that we want for each one of the columns. So beautiful. The renames list query is generating for us what we need to use as the parameter renames in that function Table.RenameColumns. So coming back to this function, we just created the element that we are going to put under this parameter here. Okay, now we need to provide the table to where we want to apply the column renaming, and we want to indicate what we want to do. In this third parameter, we can indicate how we want Power Query to act if one of those items listed in the renames list is not found in the table. And this will happen in this circumstance because not all the tables have the same columns. So some of the columns that are to be renamed, that are indicated in that renames list to be renamed, some of those do not exist in some of the tables. So every time we run that column renaming procedure, we will need to say, oh, okay, if you don't find a particular column that I'm telling you to rename, forget about it, just move on. So that's what this parameter will help us do. So we will say, for this parameter, we will use this value, missingfield.ignore. Okay, so let's do it. Going back to our transform sample file, we will create a new step for column renaming. Just simply click this button here. It will refer to the previous step named promoted headers. That's the name of the table to which we want to apply our column renaming. So let's just start typing. Let's give it a space there. Table.RenameColumns. It's coming up right there. Open parenthesis. And then this is the table. Okay, comma. The renames are the result of this query renames list. Okay, and the third parameter that we can add after the comma is the missing field. So we can go missing field, and you can see that IntelliSense is coming up. If you have Microsoft 365, you will have that. If you have Excel 2016 or 19, you may not have the IntelliSense working. Okay, so you will have to be very careful typing in manually, making sure you spell everything correctly, upper cases and lower cases, because Power Query is case sensitive. So in missing field parameter, we want to ignore. So we want to choose that one. Okay, close parentheses and enter. Okay, so let's see what happened from this step to this one, the previous step to this one. Let's rename this step. Before that, let's call this renamed columns, for example. Enter. Okay, so in here, in the promoted headers step, the column, we have the column institution, the column date, and the column number of pupils, and we now want it to be school or school name. I believe it's school, date, enrollment date, and student count. Let's check the next step. School, enrollment date, and student count. So beautiful. It applied that rule of provided with columns to be renamed. This was done to the sample file. when we go now to our schools reports main query, we should get that applied to all the tables. There's an error here, don't worry, we will get there. Before we go to the final query, let's go back to the transform sample file. There's one thing more that I want to do. I do not want to bring any extra columns that I don't want to see in the final result combined, correct? So I'm going to select school, hold down Control, enrollment date, and student count. Okay, so these are the 3 columns I want. Any other columns that are not in this list should be discarded. So right click, remove other columns. This same step will be applied to all the files in the folder. So if there are, what we are saying here, if you see the M code at the top, we are saying table select columns. Go to the previous table, the table in the previous step, in this case renamed columns, that step there, and select the columns school, enrollment date, and student count. And by doing that, we are discarding any other columns that may exist. If there are only these 3, we will bring these 3. If there are others, those will be left behind. So now we are ready. Let's go to schools, school reports query. We have an error here because the change type was applied automatically by powerquery and it's not working anymore because the column names are not the same anymore. Let's just remove it, delete it. And there we go. So now we have a nice list of schools, enrollment dates, and student counts. We can see that we have all the 3 files coming here, the names of the files showing the source.name column, and we have everything combined beautifully in one table only. So we have our magic happening here. There's just a couple of things that we need to do. We should define the data type to each one of the columns. Before we do that, we can also look at this first column, source.name, where we have information that might be useful for us. For example, if the file is giving us the area, some kind of area or school board name or something like that, we can take advantage of that and bring that information to our final table. And we also have the year and the quarter. We could also make use of it. So let's do that. Let's do some transformations to this column. They are not part of solving the big requirement that was the goal, our goal for this lesson today, but let's take it as a bonus and review a few more tricks in Power Query. Okay, first, we do not need the .csv extension. So for that, we can do under the Transform tab, extract text before delimiter. That's one way of doing it. And we indicate the delimiter here is .csv. Okay. And with that, we have the file names without the extension. Now we want to break this information into pieces. We could first think of the spaces as delimiters to break that information into different parts. But if we pay attention, this area here, north end, has a space in the name, whereas downtown does not have a space. So we cannot use space as a rule to break the source.name column into 2 portions. We can do other things. If we come to split column, we have a number of different options here that I invite you to explore and imagine of the possibilities, the different scenarios where you could apply those options, those functions in the scenarios that you have at work. In this case, we want maybe to break it by number of characters, because I know that at the end I will always have 4 characters for the year, 1 space character, and then plus 2 characters for the quarter name. So it will be 7 characters, correct? So let's choose number of characters, and we say number of characters 7. Then we need to say that we want to count 7 characters only once and as far right as possible. So we want to count 7 characters from the right end of the file name, correct? And just do OK. And there we go. So now we have the area names here on the left and the year with quarter on the right. We could now split this column into other columns to have the year and the quarter separate. We could do that, but for this example, let's leave it just like that. We will rename the first column as area and we will rename the second column as quarter. We see that we have a change type applied here, a change type step. We will delete it. We will change the type just right after this step. So let's delete it first. And in here, we can either double click to rename the columns or just be brave and do that in the formula bar. So here at the top in our formula, we can see that the new column names were defined automatically by Power Query in the formula bar. We can come here and say that this column is meant to be named area, or the column header is to be area. The column header for this other second column is to be quarter. Enter. There we go. It's applying the change type again. Okay, and now we are good to apply the change type to the other columns as well. This one is text. Column date, we want this to be a date. And student count, we want this column to be a whole number data type. Okay, so we are good to go. We can now load our query, our data to our Excel file. So home, close and load. I'm going to choose close and load to. This will apply to the other new queries that we created since the last time we were on the spreadsheet. I'm going to choose only create connection because I don't want the lists and the rename table to be loaded again. So everything will be as connection only. You see, it's loading that information. And now this one here, the school reports table, we will load to. So now right click load to change the loading destination. And this one we can say load to a table to new worksheet and OK. So there we have it. There's our information all combined. There you go. You now have a solution for that problem that we were mentioning at the beginning of the lesson. If you watched all the video until now, you now have a new skill in your tool belt if you didn't have it yet. If you were wondering why would you want to learn something that you may not need immediately at the moment, and my answer is to create problem-solving muscle, to develop your Excel expertise further. People ask me all the time, how can I become an Excel expert? How can I be better, be good at automating procedures in Excel? And my answer is by being exposed to multiple problems and by being genuinely interested in learning. The more you exercise your Excel skills, the better prepared you become to automate your procedures by combining different techniques that you have seen and learned before. Okay, so one final thing for us to do here is to add new files to the folder where we connected and test if our procedure is working correctly. So here's our folder. I have extra files here in this folder, all files, the ones under 2022 quarter 1. I'm going to copy these files and place them in the folder to where that query is connecting to. Control V here. So now we have 6 files, 3 areas, 3 school areas, and 2 different quarters. Okay. We are in our Excel file, and all we have to do is click the refresh button. It was very fast here. I don't know if you had the opportunity to see that something happened here in the corner. Let's check. We have 3 areas as before. We now have 2 quarters here, right? And we have all the schools, enrollment date, and student count. And all the data now is here. So there you go. This is what I had to show you today. Another example of automation in Excel with Power Query. If you work with Excel regularly and you find yourself constantly repeating the same steps manually, there's a great chance that those steps, those procedures can be automated. Power Query is the tool in Excel that allows us to automate those steps related to importing data and transforming the data in the way into our Excel file to be cleaned and prepared to then be analyzed or served for other procedures in our Excel spreadsheet. By combining Power Query with other Excel features, we can automate an Excel reporting process from start to finish. If you are interested in this topic, stay tuned, subscribe to this channel so that you do not lose the tutorials and training opportunities that are coming. If you learned something new on this video, or if you would have another way of solving this problem, I would certainly love to hear from you. Remember to leave a comment about that. If you know someone who could make good use of this information, take a moment to send them the video link. I'm sure that person will appreciate you. If you are interested in staying on top of what's going on in Excel and all the new and cool stuff that is coming out almost every month, let me know by subscribing my newsletter and you will receive those news on a monthly basis. Thank you for your support and I'll see you in the next video.